Imagine you are sitting at your desk on a Monday morning, staring at an email that somehow feels longer than a prison sentence. Your coffee is getting cold. Your back hurts for no reason. Someone has invited you to a meeting about another meeting, and for a second you think, honestly, this might be the worst job ever invented. Then history leans over your shoulder and whispers, be real, because for most of human history, a bad job did not mean answering messages from a person who says just checking in, like a threat. A bad job meant your body was being rented to something dangerous, disgusting, or both. It followed you home, and the first door into that world is exactly where modern life tries hardest not to look. Imagine a city before proper sewers, in a house where the bathroom is not a clean little room with a lock, but a hidden pit under or behind the building. Day after day, the pit fills. Life continues above it, while the house quietly becomes harder to breathe in. Then the smell starts climbing. It slips through the floor like a warning. It waits in the corners. It makes the air feel warm and wrong. Someone finally has to admit the sentence nobody wants to say out loud. The pit needs to be emptied. That is when the Gong Farmer comes. In Tudor England, Gong Farmers were hired to clean human waste out of privies and cesspits. They often worked at night because the city wanted this job hidden while respectable people were asleep. That detail tells you almost everything. The work was necessary enough to pay for, but shameful enough to push into darkness. Picture a narrow yard behind a house, lit by a weak lantern. The worker lifts the cover, and the smell does not simply rise. It hits the whole body. It gets behind the eyes. It turns breathing into a negotiation. Then he has to lean closer, because the job is not to observe the nightmare. The job is to remove it. There is something brutally unfair about that kind of work. Every person in the city helped create the problem, but only one person had to climb into the consequences. The cleaner the street looked in the morning, the more invisible he became. Civilization got to smile because somebody else spent the night shoveling the part of civilization nobody wanted to claim. At first, that feels like the bottom. How could work get worse than standing over a pit of human waste in the dark, hoping the ground beneath you does not betray you? Then you look up, and there is a small child disappearing into a chimney. In old Britain, chimney sweeping was not always a grown man with a brush. For a long time, the most useful tool was a child small enough to climb inside the flue. That sounds almost fake until you imagine black dust filling the mouth, and the only way forward being upward into a darkness so tight the body itself becomes the tool. A child would climb because an adult could not fit. That is the entire horror in one thought. The house below might be warm and respectable. A family might sit near the fireplace and enjoy the comfort of the fire, but hidden inside the wall was a little body moving through soot, coughing in a place where panic had nowhere to go. If the child got stuck, the chimney did not care. If the soot filled his lungs, the room downstairs still looked normal. This is where the idea of a bad job changes shape. The Gong Farmer suffered because adults refused to face their own mess. The climbing boy suffered because adults discovered that children could fit inside the problem. The damage did not always end when the workday ended. In the 18th century, Surgeon Percival Pott connected chimney sweeps with a specific cancer caused by their exposure to soot. It was one of the early moments when medicine began to understand that a job could slowly poison a person over time. Some jobs hurt you immediately. Others shake your hand politely and ruin you later. Once you see that, the Industrial Revolution starts to look less like a shiny age of progress and more like a machine that learned how to hide suffering behind clean windows. A factory could look organized from the street, with workers entering in the morning and leaving in the evening. It had the shape of modern life, which makes the horror feel even stranger. Inside some match factories, workers handled white phosphorus, the chemical that helped matches ignite easily. A match is such a tiny object that it feels harmless. You strike it, it flares, you move on. But for the people making them, the danger was not in one dramatic explosion. It was in breathing the same poison day after day while doing careful work for careful pay. The disease became known as phossy jaw. It began in the mouth, which makes it feel especially cruel. A toothache could turn into swelling. The jawbone could become exposed. The face could change. Some victims suffered infections so severe that the disease could become fatal. There are accounts of affected bone giving off a strange glow in the dark, which sounds like a ghost story until you remember this was not a legend. It was a workplace. The match itself promised control over fire, one of humanity's oldest dreams. A little stick could bring light into a room, but behind that tiny convenience were workers whose own bodies were paying the price for everyone else's easy flame. By this point, the worst job is no longer just about disgust or danger. It is about distance. The person enjoying the clean house does not see the Gong Farmer. The person striking a match does not see the jaws slowly rotting in the factory. Comfort gets easier when the suffering is hidden far far enough away. Then, there were jobs where nothing could be hidden because the suffering was everywhere. Imagine a city during a plague outbreak. At first, it does not look dramatic. A neighbor stops coming outside. A familiar window stays closed. The street that usually has voices in it starts to feel too quiet. People begin speaking more carefully, as if the air itself has become something you should not disturb. Then the quiet spreads. During those times, normal life did not pause cleanly. Homes still needed help. Streets still needed order. Messages still had to be carried. Doors still had to be opened by someone. While most people tried to stay away from anything risky, a few workers had to move through the uneasy parts of the town and do the tasks nobody wanted to do. That kind of work was frightening in a very different way. It was not the sharp shock of a chimney or the awful smell of a pit. It was the feeling that every ordinary place had become uncertain. A doorway was no longer just a doorway. A room was no longer just a room. Even a quiet street could feel like it was hiding a question you did not want answered. A worker like that did not need anyone to explain fear. He met it in the faces behind half-open doors. He heard it in the way people lowered their voices. He felt it in the empty spaces where normal life used to be. And when one task was finished, the town did not feel finished with him. There was always another house, another street, another silence waiting a little farther on. Still, there is one more kind of work that belongs here, because it is quieter than a town in crisis, but somehow just as haunting. The work of the radium dial painters looked almost beautiful. In the early 20th century, young women painted watch dials with glowing radium paint so the numbers could be seen in the dark. The job had a modern shine to it. The watches felt futuristic. The workers were told the material was safe, and many shaped their brushes with their lips to make the lines fine. Imagine that room for a second. Not a pit, not a chimney, not a frightened street, but a bright workshop where the danger looks magical. That is what makes it so disturbing. The glow was not just on the dials. At first, it must have seemed almost playful, like the future had arrived in a little bottle of light. Then the body began telling the truth. Some workers suffered anemia, bone damage, and jaw necrosis. The beautiful glow had been entering them one careful brushstroke at a time. This is maybe the most modern version of the nightmare. The old terrible jobs looked terrible. A cesspit warned you with smell. A chimney warned you with darkness. A plague house warned you with silence. But radium came dressed as progress. It did not look like a monster. It looked like a paycheck in a clean room. And that brings the whole question back to us. When we ask about the worst job in human history, the answer is not just one job, it is a pattern. Again and again, people found ways to move danger onto someone else's body. One person got the clean house, and another got the pit. One person got the glowing watch, and another carried the glow in their bones. That is the real horror hiding under the question. A terrible job is not only hard, dirty, or dangerous. It becomes something deeper when the worker is made invisible, when their suffering becomes the price of someone else's comfort, and when the world keeps moving because they are too tired, too poor, or too replaceable to refuse. So the next time your inbox makes you want to fake your own disappearance, you are allowed to be annoyed. Work can still be exhausting, even when nobody is asking you to climb into a chimney. But somewhere behind that little complaint is a much older story. For most of history, the worst jobs were not just things people did. They were places where civilization sent the pain it did not want to feel.